This family decided to clean up their father's garage when they came together for the summer. Upon opening it, they were astonished to discover not just a few trips down memory lane, but also a 50-year accumulation of rubbish. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. Sitting on his porch, Grant Carver took a long pull on his drink. His thoughts drifted back into the past, as they often did these days. It had been 30 years since he was alone. Grant had never remarried since his wife passed away while their daughter Karen was just 7 years old. Prior to his retirement, he worked as an airline pilot and was so engrossed in his job that he had never had time to realize how lonely he was. He was continually traveling to or from another nation, and he knew people everywhere. However, it was beginning to bother him now. He missed having a companion in the house, someone to greet him in the morning and spend the evenings cuddling with. Above all, he missed having private conversations with someone, the kind of conversations that only lovers or married couples can have. He was missing someone who was privy to practically all of his secrets. Grant never even told his wife while she was still living, but he did have one secret that only he knew. It all started with a week-long R&R spent during the Vietnam War in Pattaya Beach in Thailand. He had been away for a week away from the violent jungles of Vietnam. He arrived in a location where he encountered someone who fundamentally altered his inner landscape. However, he was unable to ever disclose this individual to anyone. Even after all these years, keeping the secret felt like a lump of hot coal within his gut, a fire that would never go out. However, he also realized that he would never be able to let go of it. The notion of it still caused a peculiar stirring in him. Grant undertook several perilous trips to rescue injured American soldiers in the harsh Vietnamese jungle. There was an aura of special protection around him for those who flew with him. His presence was comforting, and everyone felt that he would survive. A little smile twitched across Grant's lips' corners. Back then, he was just fearless. The lads were aware that if they rode with him, he would return. Grant felt unbeatable, even under enemy fire and with their chopper full of injured. The chopper was struck by gunfire, but he was uninjured. A bullet had once passed through his helmet and, amazingly, missed his skull. During his 1969-1970 deployment, Grant and his Huey crew are credited with saving the lives of approximately 2,000 American wounded. That made him proud. They were referred to as the Dust-Off Crew, and they lived up to their motto: unwavering, committed dedication to our armed troops. The tales from back then, when he eventually returned to the United States and started flying commercial aircraft, made for some great chats at the grill. However, the conflict persisted within him. There were sights, sounds, and scents that he had come to terms with the fact would never leave him, even after all these years. The secret was there after that. It would be with him till they lowered him into a grave, just like one of those memories. He hoped that wasn't true. Grant looked at the time as he made his way to the kitchen to get another drink. In the next half an hour, the youngsters ought to arrive. That was excellent. Their presence would temporarily ward off the loneliness. Though he was already looking forward to their return to Boston, he was also looking forward to it. In the back seat, Mike and Andy were making fun of their older sister. Letitia, who was heading off to college in the autumn, was 4 years older than the twins. She left them alone, taking in the beauty of rural Virginia while gazing out the window at the passing farms and woodlands. Up front, Carl and Karen were having a far more serious talk while ignoring the children. "Really, love, if you think you're going to get my father into an old age home, you have another thing coming," Karen said. "He won't leave," Carl objected. "He is by himself. He even states as much. If we can find him a good home, at least he will have company." "There will be company for him." Karen angrily shook her head. "My father is someone I know. Seeing his army comrades twice a week makes him happy." Yes, he is lonely, but he has to take action to address this. He would be furious if we meddled. Make me a promise not to tell anything. It will simply spoil the vacation." With his hands clasped over his hips, Grant remained still on the porch, observing the rental car as it slowly navigated the lengthy driveway. He couldn't help but smile. He was devoted to his daughter, not all of his son-in-law's faults. His granddaughter was the pride of his life, and the twins were always a lot of fun. He wanted nothing more in the world right now than to hold them all in his arms and give them the death grip. Greetings were a drawn-out process. He gave Karen a hug for so long that she feared he would never let go. He and his son-in-law shook hands after that. Letitia moved aside, allowing the twins to enter first. They too lingered briefly in their grandfather's embrace. Subsequently, he met Letitia's gaze, and she met his. There was a unique relationship between them. "You remind me of your grandmother, Pumpkin," he stated. She whispered quietly in his ear, "Grandpa, you always say that," as she leaped into his arms. "I wish we could have been acquainted." That evening after supper, the children began to tell Grant about their ideas for his garage. While they were here, they made the decision to organize and repack his garage and made the decision to not accept no for an answer. Grant was going to object. Only God is aware of what they may discover within that. It felt like 10 years since he'd even opened the door. There was his entire past, most likely partially consumed by rats by now. He then turned to face the children, though. The twins' youthful joy was visible to him. For them, this was a dusty, gloomy spot where young boys could let their imaginations run wild. Letty had more tender, loving eyes. She desired to treat him to something exceptional. Grant only nodded after a lengthy moment of quiet, not wanting to take away their delight. When he said, "I'll help you if you want," the children would not accept it. This was going to be their journey and only theirs. Just after midnight that night, Grant sprung upright in his bed, his trade secret. He was unsure if there was anything in the garage that may lead the children to the one item he had spent so much time keeping concealed from the public. He searched his thoughts in an attempt to recall what was in the garage, but he was unable to. Finally, he tired out and went back to sleep. The children had left for work when Grant arrived for breakfast. The lads had begun to move some of the boxes obstructing the driveway's access outdoors, and the garage door was ajar. Pushing a cup of coffee into his hand, Karen dialed the children. While he observed, the mild worry from the early hours of the morning reappeared as they fiddled around in the garage. He searched again, trying to find anything that would reveal what he had managed to hide so well, but just like the night before, he came up empty. The first person to leave the breakfast table was Letitia. She took a step back and assessed the situation at the garage. She was a lady and older than the lads. That implied that she would follow a set of rules. She didn't think the twins would measure up. She was aware that they would provide some assistance, become distracted by whatever they discovered, become bored with it, and then provide some more assistance. She was devoid of issue with that. In addition to having a great day, they would be doing something unique for Grandpa. Just before noon, the twins discovered the first major discovery. They discovered a bulky radio, a helmet, a rusty dagger, and 2 filthy satchels inside a metal trunk. There was an ancient tin behind it all. When they opened it, they found fading pictures inside along with faded markings on it. "Gimme," Letitia murmured, grabbing it out of Andy's grasp. She was taller than him, so he kept trying to take it from her until he gave up. "Now, let's all sit down together and look at these," she stated. The majority of the photos showed a much younger Grandpa with a number of additional troops near Army helicopters. The children were unaware of the location, identity, and significance of the persons in the pictures. The twins displayed their discovery at the lunch table. The radio, knife, and helmet are placed on the server. Letitia folded the photos in her hand. "What are these, Grandpa?" Posed by Andy. Grant glanced at Karen, asking whether it was all right to talk about the war. She said nothing, just nodded. He then told the 3 children the most daring story they had ever heard while they were eating lunch. The stories had heroes, villains, battles, comebacks, heartache, and tears. Grandpa had been a part of each one, and they were all better than any story they had ever watched on television. Of these stories, the 3 grandkids of Grant were astonished beyond belief. However, during this entire time, freezing fingers gripped Grant's back. The kids would undoubtedly discover whatever memento he had kept in the garage that had anything to do with his secret, because he had forgotten about it all. They did, an hour after lunch. Letitia discovered the little tin first. It resembled what they'd seen in one of the pictures. Together, they created the most amazing existence. I truly adored your grandma, you know, even though I realize that may sound weird to you." Just then, something began to develop in the back of Letitia's thoughts. It grew, forced its way through the subconscious's soil and into her consciousness, where it developed into a plan. Letitia missed breakfast and complained of having a headache the next morning. She was really upstairs, talking on the phone in her bedroom. She was staring at her laptop with its lid open, trying very hard to focus. Karen became worried at dinner time as she had skipped lunch as well. Letitia told her when she knocked that she was okay and only needed a little rest. The following day, she repeated the arrangement. She entered the living room shortly after lunch, glowing with victory. Her words, "I'm expecting a guest tomorrow," were delivered without fanfare. With butterflies in her stomach, Letitia watched as the automobile wandered up the driveway at approximately 10 in the morning. She was unable to obtain a clear view of the person driving because of the window tinting. Beside her was her granddad. He had allowed her to remain clandestine. When she was ready, she would raise her hand and he would not press her. But all the color vanished from his face when the stranger pulled to a halt and got out of the car. What he was witnessing was beyond belief. Grant was so stunned that he was immobile or talk. A stunning woman of similar age approached the porch and ascended the stairs. She turned to Grant after placing a hand on Letitia's face. "Hello, Grant," she extended her hands in greeting. With a tense voice, he replied, "Hello, Eleanor," taking her hands in his. "How's that for a happy ending? Have you ever reconnected with someone you hadn't seen in a long time? Leave a comment with your tale. We'd be interested in hearing it, but that's it from us for now. I appreciate you seeing. We'll see you in the upcoming video." Renowned surgeon Dr. Eric Parker was midway through a crucial procedure when cops stormed into the operating room. 10-year-old Mia, his daughter, saw her father being brought away in handcuffs and stared in despair and bewilderment. Eric was well known for his commitment and talent, so the hospital was shocked by his unexpected arrest at such a sensitive period. Maya was terrified and perplexed, unable to comprehend what was going on. Who would arrest her dad, particularly in the middle of surgery? When Mia found out the surprising cause for her father's detention, her life fell apart, and she vowed never to speak to him again. When it happened, Mia was relaxing on a seat in a park outside her dad's hospital job. She was there waiting for her dad to finish his shift with her mother, eating a sandwich. She had once asked, "How much longer, Mom?" since she was so happy to see her father. "Just have patience, my love." Christina, her mother, had informed her that he'll be here soon. He had informed her that after his operation was over, he would text her. But when she saw that she had no messages yet, she thought that perhaps he had wanted to surprise them. Well, she was wrong about that, but she was definitely surprised by what she saw next. Mia hadn't noticed it yet, and she was still smiling as she approached her father, who turned pale with shock as soon as he laid eyes on her. Maya was just about to ask him whether everything was all right when she noticed an officer was walking next to him, looking very serious and angry. "Even Mia, sweetie, go home. I love you," Eric called out to her as the officer guided him to her car, which was parked just outside the hospital. Mia was completely shocked by what she was seeing, and her mother had joined her by then as well. "Help him!" she yelled, while tears streamed down her face. Christina couldn't believe what was happening, and she ran to the car, slamming her fists on the window. "Eric, what is happening? This has to be a mistake. Please, you have to let him go," she screamed. But the officer simply instructed her to get away from the car. Once the vehicle had departed, Christina composed herself. Telling her daughter to get in the car, she wanted to show her strength for Mia. They were heading straight to the station to see what was going on. Desperate for information, Mia and Christina hurried through the police station's sliding doors. They learned less the more questions they asked. Police walked by without making eye contact. Mia pulled at her mother's sleeve, growing increasingly irritated. She said, "Why won't they tell us anything?" Christina shook her head, a determined and worried mask on her features. Despite being surrounded by the sound of police radios and the shuffling of feet, they felt trapped and alone in their desperate search for answers. The door finally opened, and Eric was led in handcuffs, linking his wrists. Eric's appearance shocked them both. His surgical scrubs were wrinkled and stained, his hair unkempt. Dark circles under his eyes told of stress and sleepless hours. "You pretty outside?" Mia slumped onto a cold metal bench. Her mind raced with questions, each one deepening the knot of worry in her stomach. Back in the room, Eric and Christina spoke in hushed tones. "The charges are severe," Eric murmured, his face pale. Christina's hands trembled slightly as she listened, her eyes never leaving his. "But I didn't do it, Christina," Eric added quickly, his voice firm yet desperate. After what felt like hours, Christina reappeared in the doorway. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, giving Mia a tight hug. Together they walked towards the exit of the station, the evening air cool against their faces. The car ride home was quiet, the city lights blurring past as Christina drove. The house felt different, heavier somehow as they moved through the evening routines. Dinner was quiet, the usual chatter replaced by a thick silence that neither seemed able to break. The air was filled with unasked questions and unspoken worries. The next morning at school, Maya felt eyes on her as she walked through the halls. Whispers followed her from locker to classroom, each word like a small sting. Walking down the crowded school hallway, Mia caught snippets of conversations. "Did you hear about her dad?" One voice snickered. "He's a criminal," another chimed in, laughter following the harsh words. She had to know what others were talking about her father. She took a deep breath, opened the school computer, and hesitated a fraction of a second before entering his name in the search box. To make sure no one was looking, she looked around the room. Mia's eyes became wide as she clicked on the first story, and the screen filled with headlines. It included the precise time and date of Eric's arrest, in addition to brief and imprecise statements of the charges. Mia skimmed the paper. Her attention became more focused as she read each word. Mia began reading more stories and pieced together the accusations made against her father. Despite the legal jargon in each report, she managed to piece together enough information to understand the gravity of the charges. Her eyes never left the screen as her breathing became more shallow. She was too busy concentrating on the wonderful words that portrayed her father in such a negative light to notice when the bell for lunch ended. She tried to make sense of the father she knew and the one depicted in the papers, but all she could feel was anger and uncertainty. The loud ring of the school bell snapped Mia back to reality. She quickly shut down the computer, her thoughts still swirling. Standing up, she barely noticed the other students bustling around her, all rushing to their next class. Mia couldn't sit through another class, not with her thoughts in turmoil. She left the school grounds, her pace fast and determined as she headed home. Mia stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. "Mom, what's going on with Dad? I saw the articles." Christina, taken aback by Mia's sudden entrance and sharp tone, dropped the book she was holding. "Yeah, let's sit down and talk about this," she stuttered, her mind racing to formulate a response to Mia's pointed questions. "I was going to tell you," Christina began, her voice weak. She tried to explain the little she knew, but her words seemed to stumble over each other. Mia's eyes filled with tears, and frustration didn't miss the hesitation. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" Mia accused, unable to contain her anger. Mia turned on her heel and stormed up, reaching her room. She slammed the door shut and turned the lock with a sharp click. Christina made frequent visits to the detention center, hoping each time to understand more about Eric's situation. From him with her notepad stuffed with notes and questions from their earlier conversations. Eric looked worn out, but was always willing to explain things in an attempt to allay her concerns. Christina's commitment to assist Eric remained steadfast, even as each visit ended with her feeling a mixture of perplexity and optimism. "Do you want to come with me to see Dad?" One morning, Christina questioned Mia with a hopeful tone in her voice. Mia shook her head, her face unyielding. "No thanks," she mumbled, scarcely taking her eyes off her food. Christina sighed, the distance between Eric and Mia hurting her heart. Her keys jangling in her palm as she left the house served as a subtle reminder of the widening distance between them in their family. As the trial started, Christina was there in the front row of the courtroom every day. She took meticulous notes, her eyes rarely straying from the proceedings. Each witness called in, each piece of evidence presented, she followed with intense focus, trying to understand the depth of the situation her husband was in. Despite Christina's attempts to involve her, Mia refused to attend the trial. "I can't see him," she said quietly whenever her mother asked. She couldn't bring herself to face the room, the lawyers, or her father. Instead, Mia spent her days distracted at school and restless at home, avoiding conversations about the trial and burying herself in schoolwork and music, trying to keep the reality of her father's situation at bay. As the trial progressed, local media swarmed the courthouse, eager to cover the sensational story of a respected doctor facing serious charges. Reporters often approached Christina, who politely declined to comment. As more witnesses testified, the evidence stacked against Eric seemed overwhelming. Each testimony was more damning than the last, with detailed descriptions of the alleged misconduct. Mia, passing by the kitchen, overheard her mother on the phone discussing Eric's trial. "It doesn't look good," Christina said, her voice strained. Mia paused, her hand on the wall for support. The reality of her father's possible future hit her hard. She felt a growing sense of dread. Her anxiety mixed with her earlier fury, and she silently withdrew to her room, the conversation's weight bearing down on her. The likelihood that Eric would receive a significant sentence developed as the main conversation subject in the courthouse hallways as the trial went on. Legal experts conjectured on the length of incarceration. A series of emails and papers that suggested Eric had been set up by a co-worker were revealed in court, marking a dramatic reversal in the case. Eric's face displayed signals of relaxation that had not seen in weeks, while Christina screamed and covered her mouth with her hands. Further investigation revealed the motive behind the framing: envy. Eric's colleague, who had long coveted his position and recognition, had orchestrated the scheme. Details of the colleague's actions unfolded through more uncovered emails and covert recordings. The prosecution, caught off guard, huddled in urgent conversation, their case unraveling in the courtroom. Papers shuffled and laptops clicked rapidly as attorneys adjusted their approaches. The atmosphere in the courtroom and at home began to shift from despair to cautious optimism. Eric walked through the door, a free man. Christina and Eric paused, his eyes meeting hers, a gentle smile spreading across his face. He sat down his bag and opened his arms, inviting her closer. Mia hesitated, then moved forward, the initial awkwardness lingering in the air as they embraced. Later, sitting at the kitchen table, Mia and Eric finally talked. Eric recounted the details of his exoneration, while Mia listened intently, nodding as they discussed the evidence that had freed him. Eric explained how he always believed the truth would prevail. Mia absorbed every word, the barriers between them beginning to crumble as understanding and relief replaced the doubts that had once clouded their relationship. Mia took a deep breath, her voice soft. "Dad, I'm sorry I doubted you," she said. Eric shook his head gently, taking her hand. "There's nothing to apologize for, Mia. It was a hard time for all of us," he replied, his tone forgiving. Their conversation marked a turning point, mending the rift that had grown between them during the months of uncertainty and fear. Laughter and conversation filled the room as the family gathered around the dinner table that evening. The excitement of Eric's cleared name and their reunion was reflected in the lighter ambiance and lunch. There was an air of confidence as they discussed plans for the future. They embraced a hope for the future and felt completely united for the first time in months. Tim had been a park ranger for a very long time, and he was passionate about what he did. He followed the same path every day to keep an eye on the animals' whereabouts and water supplies. He was astounded by what he saw every day, despite the fact that nothing much changed. However, he realized that something terrible had occurred when he saw this specific nest. For the last 3 years, Tim had gone by this nest almost every day. He had observed its construction with great interest throughout the years, and he could still clearly recall the day it had first emerged. Ordinarily, he could already hear the birds singing joyfully in the distance. However, it was quiet today. Somewhere in the park he could hear other sounds, like leaves rustling and birds tweeting, but there was silence surrounding this tree. In all the years the nest had been in the park, nothing like this had ever occurred. In addition, not a single bird was visible in this area. Tim could usually see a couple birds jumping about on the nest, and on really slow days, he might even see them bringing back twigs to further enlarge the nest. He moved cautiously toward the tree, not wanting to frighten away any birds that may be nesting within. Ultimately, apart from the quiet, everything appeared perfectly normal. Tim didn't want to bother the birds if they were there, but he wasn't positive they weren't. He ultimately made the decision to wait to act. Maybe all of this had a completely reasonable rationale, and he didn't want to break into the bird's house without a valid cause. He withdrew as a result, vowing to check again the next day. He was planning to act if the nest still appeared to be empty. Tim could not get rid of the uneasy sensation he had throughout the day. He prayed that everything would be normal and the birds would be chirping when he came to the park the next day. This was not going to occur, of course. We shouldn't go ahead of ourselves, but he would even eventually contact the cops. Tim got at the park early the next day. He just had to go to the tree and check on the nest again, and he did so right away. He knew as soon as he saw it that something wasn't right, but he persuaded himself not to jump to any judgment just yet. He saw some odd markings on the ground as he got closer to the tree. He was unable to identify them and was certain that no animal, at least not one that was known to be in the park, could have created them. Oh no! Considering all the potential threats that may have entered this area, he spoke such words. For a minute, Tim became quite concerned, but then, looking around the tree carefully, he decided that the birds had probably not been assaulted. He reasoned that, whatever had happened, the birds had not been damaged badly because there were no feathers or injured birds on the ground. He wanted to peer inside the nest to fully comprehend what was happening, but the tree was too tall for him to do so. He then proceeded to the ranger station and gathered all the gear he needed. He usually walked around the park, but this time he used a vehicle. He unloaded the ladder and set it down close to the tree when he got there. He was rather excited to see inside the nest, even though it was trembling as he ascended. The birds would have flown out of the nest in fear normally due to the ladder's rattling and clanking, but this time they stayed put. For Tim, this was just further evidence that he was onto something, and he grew more and more certain by the moment that the nest would be empty. Of course, he wouldn't know for sure until he had a peek inside. He had taken a variety of equipment with him because there was no other way to accomplish this except by sawing through the nest. His eyes widened in shock at what he saw as soon as he ascended far enough on the ladder to have a closer view at the nest. "What? How is this even possible?" he cried out. He was so astonished that he nearly lost his balance and tumbled down the ladder. You see, the birds inside this nest had shelter since it was typically rather thick. However, Tim was certain that the birds themselves had not caused this enormous hole in the nest. Thus, the query persisted. By whom had it been done? Tim's concerns were validated when he eventually got a chance to peek inside the nest thanks to this opening. It included no birds at all. However, this does not imply that the nest was deserted entirely. Instead, he went down the ladder to get his phone and notify the police as soon as he discovered something inside that shouldn't have been there. Tim scrambled down the ladder, his pulse pounding from the shock of seeing the nest empty. His voice strained as he described what he had discovered. He called the police, puzzled and worried. He talked about the unusually empty nest and the peculiar object he found within. Anticipating haste from the police, he awaited their reaction with bated breath, praying they would recognize the gravity of the situation. Tim's sense of urgency was not shared over the phone by the cops, though. Their tone was dismissive, implying that it was likely the work of an animal or a minor anomaly. They told Tim not to worry too much and to keep an eye on it, since they weren't convinced it was anything the police should look into. As he stood there by himself in the peaceful park, Tim became frustrated. The apathy of the cops hurt. What he saw wasn't normal, he knew that. However, his worries were dismissed. The nest's mystery tormented him. Should he investigate more, believing his gut feeling that something was wrong, or should he just leave it go, as the cops advised? Tim struggled with his choice for a while, but it was obvious. He would act if the cops failed to do so. He couldn't help but feel uneasy about the nest and everything in it. His irritation gave way to determination. He would launch his own inquiry, gather proof, and record everything. He was now a man on a mission, not merely a park ranger. Tim went back to the nest and started his own research. He examined the area under the tree, searching for any clues that may clarify the state of the nest. footsteps, abandoned objects, or anything unusual. It was crucial to be exhaustive and impartial. He began to put together the mystery of the quiet nest and its contents by taking notes and pictures. Tim's eyes searched the area surrounding the nest with great care. He searched for any disruption, any clue that would explain the enigma surrounding the nest. Broken branches, moved dirt, strange markings, anything that didn't seem right. No matter how little the observation, he recorded it all. Every piece of evidence might hold a clue to the mystery surrounding what transpired in this once active nest. Tim tried to get in touch with his other rangers in case they had seen something he had missed. He questioned all of them. "Have you seen anything unusual around the big nest lately?" Though their answers differed, none of them had seen anything noteworthy. But Tim remained unwavering in his resolve. He was aware that occasionally the tiniest, most easily missed element can hold the secret to unlocking a mystery. Tim then went up to park visitors. He asked nicely, "Have you noticed anything strange around the big nest on your walks?" The majority shook their heads. However, several reported hearing strange noises or seeing shadows close to the nest. Tim took note of each account, even if they were hazy. Tim arranged his notes and pictures in his office again, trying to see a pattern. The information was few and unclear. Strange noises heard by guests, his colleagues' failure to make any unexpected findings, and the nest's quiet. Tim gazed at the data, attempting to make sense of these seemingly unrelated pieces and piece them together into a cohesive tale. What was that nest all about? Tim moved his attention back to the tree and its surrounds. At that point, he spotted a pattern in the markings close to the tree's base that was nearly hidden by the undergrowth. These were neither accidental scrapes or aging signs. They were purposeful, even systematic. However, what were they trying to say? The enigma surrounding the quiet nest was further deepened by this unexpected finding. Tim realized something as he studied the strange markings by the tree. These indicators clearly showed evidence of human intervention. They were not the creations of animals. The positioning and arrangement of the markings all pointed to a purposeful activity on the part of the person. This was a turning point in Tim's research. The formerly hushed nest was now a place where people were involved. Additional examination turned up additional telling indicators. Tim discovered tracks in the leaves that were too big and clear to belong to any park animal. There were faint but noticeable tool marks in the bark of a nearby tree. These were the outcome of certain deliberate activities. They were not random. Tim felt an increasing feeling of urgency as he recorded every footprint and imprint, and his heart raced. Tim began to recognize a pattern, recalling the visitors' descriptions of shadows and noises. He recalled having first discounted the possibility that he had seen lights in the park after hours. Their actions, the objects they were using, and the times of their visits all suggested a relationship to the strange happenings in the nest. Tim realized he was onto something big. He had to keep watching and collect enough proof to show that they were involved in whatever was happening in his park. When Tim discovered a letter that said, "Stop looking where you shouldn't," pinned to his office door, his inquiry took an unsettling turn. It was a clear and menacing message. His spying had been spotted and someone wasn't amused about it. This revelation not only made Tim shiver, but it also gave him confidence that he was headed in the correct direction. Even with that dire warning, Tim was not going to back down. The threat, if anything, strengthened his resolve. While he was aware that the hazards were increasing, so too was the significance of his research. Tim became more determined, realizing that giving up would mean letting whatever was going on in the park go out of control. Tim followed his instinct and went down an overgrown path he hadn't noticed before. It was nestled among dense forest in a less visited area of the park. He cautiously proceeded through and discovered that it led to a remote location hidden from view from the main trails. For someone looking to stay under the radar, it was the ideal location. Tim made some startling findings in this secret location. Along with many empty cages of varying sizes, he discovered a few tools that didn't seem appropriate in a nature reserve. These objects suggested illicit activity, maybe capturing wildlife or something more nefarious. Tim used his camera to record everything, feeling a great deal of responsibility for what he discovered. The authorities were intrigued by this suggestion that the nest held a secret. Tim had made a calculated decision to enlist the police's help and guide them to the source of the mystery. Tim's testimony persuaded the police, who decided to work with him. For Tim, it was a momentous occasion. At last, his perseverance and hard work had paid off. They came up with a strategy to look into it more. Tim experienced optimism and a sense of affirmation. Now that he had the government on his side, they could investigate the mystery surrounding the park and the nest in greater detail. Tim presented all of his evidence to the authorities during a meeting. He showed the pictures of the equipment and cages, the suspicious group's visitation patterns, and his observations of the odd actions occurring around the nest. As the cops listened carefully, their doubts about the extent of possible unlawful activity in the park began to grow. Tim started planning an operation with the police to find out just how much was being done illegally in the park. Tim and the cops made an astonishing find during the sting operation. It concealed a horde of endangered animal eggs in the nest. These eggs were not from the park, and it was against the law and hazardous to the ecology to have them there. This finding was the final piece in the puzzle connecting the enigmatic actions in the park to the smuggling of animals. A startling discovery was made once the eggs were examined. They belonged to a wider network of illicit wildlife traders. Endangering endangered species, the smugglers had been utilizing the park as a covert center for their illegal activities. This network, working beneath the cover of the park's natural beauty, was more broad and well-organized than anybody had imagined. Tim had a vital role in the sting operation. With his in-depth knowledge of the park, he assisted the police in setting up their position so as to apprehend the smugglers without drawing attention to themselves. His knowledge of the topography of the park and the actions of the suspicious group came in very handy. Normally a park ranger, Tim found himself in the middle of an undercover mission. The procedure worked as planned. After being apprehended with the rare eggs, the smugglers were taken into custody. Tim's evidence collection and the police's astute preparation resulted in an efficient and quick apprehension. Tim and the police celebrated this moment as a victory since it signaled the end of the smugglers' illicit operations in the park and the start of justice for the animals they put in peril. The depth of the smugglers' operations was revealed upon their apprehension. A sophisticated network engaged in the illicit trafficking in endangered animals, and their eggs was discovered during the inquiry. One aspect of their extensive unlawful operations had been the nest in the park. Thanks to Tim's hard work and teamwork with the police, they were able to bust a large-scale wildlife smuggling operation. Now apprehended, the smugglers had to deal with the legal fallout from their deeds. The seriousness of wildlife smuggling was highlighted by the court procedures, which exposed the extent of their illicit operations. Given that they were given sentences appropriate to their offenses, justice was done. This result was a major win for the preservation of wildlife and evidence of the value of conservation and vigilance work. With 2 kids in tow, they placed an order for just one kid's meal. There was a problem, as the waitress realized: a waiter. When a family with 2 kids placed an order at the restaurant for only one kid's lunch, Judith became quite concerned. She made the decision to keep an eye on them and saw that the little child was going without food and receiving no conversation from the other family members. "Do you need help?" she said, holding out a sign. She received the necessary confirmation quite promptly. Having at last been able to speak with the young child, Judith was prepared to act. Therefore, as the family stood and took the young child by the hand, as they were leaving the restaurant, Judith was more than happy to obstruct them by asking pointed questions. The family was about to leave when Judith and a few other dinner attendees confronted them with what they had seen. After turning as red as a cherry, the father turned to face his daughter. "This is not what it looks like," the father blurted out. Judith could hardly believe he was done. But why had the father said that? Was there something else going on? Or was there something wrong with the small girl? Judith had enough experience working in the same restaurant to know that she could rely on her instincts when it came to patrons. She sensed something off when a young family entered that afternoon. She didn't have time to examine them closely to determine what was upsetting her, and nothing about them was plainly wrong. The restaurant was full of patrons because it was Saturday night's supper rush. Judith arrived with beverages in hand, checked that the family was situated at their table, and raced over to collect orders from the other guests. Although the family appeared kind, she couldn't get rid of the sense that something was lacking. Judith went past the family several times on her way back and forth, then came back to take their order for supper. Considering they had 2 little children at the table, the only thing she noticed about them was that they were quieter than the other visitors. That appeared to be beneficial, in fact. Perhaps they would make a simple table, or perhaps not. Judith, a professional waitress, was aware that even well-behaved children sometimes exhibit sudden mood swings. When kids weren't yelling or rushing around, she felt thankful. She was almost sorry that she had misjudged the family when they had first come. However, Judith's relief turned to dismay as soon as the family began to finish their order. Judith discovered that the family had placed only 3 supper orders after they were all done. That didn't add up because there were 2 parents and 2 kids. Not even a side dish to pair with the entrees, nor a second meal from the kids' menu was served. And Judith's mind went into overdrive. What was happening? Concerned about the second kid was Judith. Even an adult may have been satisfied by their entree, but they weren't very large to split. Furthermore, even if the youngster had dietary restrictions, at the very least, the parents ought to have placed a modest order. Judith observed the kids to look for any indications of a problem. Nothing unusual seemed to be happening. The children seemed well-mannered and kind. However, Judith had witnessed parents deprive their kids of food as a form of discipline after spending years visiting various households. However, there was a significant distinction between providing a disobedient child with no food at all and refusing to purchase them food in a restaurant. She made the decision to investigate the situation. Judith requested one of her co-workers to take over the table for her in the interim. When the family didn't believe she was looking, she wanted to be able to check in with them. Even though Judith would have to divide her gratuity, it seemed worthwhile to find out whether the kids were okay. All she had to do was wait for their order to be prepared. Judith experimented with many approaches and discovered the most effective techniques to monitor the family without drawing their attention. She might linger at the bar's edge or stand at the waitress station in the rear. Both locations appeared organic. Judith was able to make some inferences about the family after watching them for a short while. All of the adults at the table were chatting and acting lively, with the exception of the little child. The girl sat quietly while the parents and their son engaged in conversation. She remained completely silent as the others giggled or shared a tale. Although Judith was aware that some kids may become accustomed to toxic households, she didn't see any indications that the small youngster was unhappy about the circumstances. The little child pretended to stand up from the table at one point. The youngster may have been attempting to get aid if she was in danger, or perhaps she just wanted to use the restroom. Her father, however, grabbed hold of her hand and prevented her from moving as soon as she did. Judith was about to step in when she saw that the family had finished their meal. Judith went to the table and got the food for the family. She presented the adults with the full-size entree before presenting the kids' dinner. Gathering all the bravery she possessed, Judith determined she had to speak up. She was unable to ignore the situation. Judith claimed to be perplexed about the missing dinner since she was certain that the family hadn't observed her observing them. She approached the little girl to offer her an opportunity to reach out if she so desired, and she inquired as to which youngster had placed the order for the dinner. Judith was not shocked at all when the parents replied. The father said that the food was for his kid, without thinking twice. The boy appeared happy that his dinner was ready, while the other kids showed no reaction at all. Judith, who was still bewildered, inquired as to whether the second child's supper had disappeared and offered to check with the kitchen to see if it had been inadvertently overlooked. When the family heard Judith's query, they all appeared to freeze. With a glance that the waitress couldn't quite interpret, the girl showed a special interest in what Judith was asking. With considerable trepidation, the girl's father replied that his daughter wasn't hungry. Judith was uncertain about whom to trust. Judith saw right away that the parents were not behaving the same way toward her. They had finished responding to her queries based on their body language. She didn't want to annoy customers and had other tables to tend to, even though she wanted to keep asking. She wasn't prepared to quit up just yet, though. There wasn't much time left for Judith to discover the little girl's condition. She wanted so much to assist, but while the girl was silent, there wasn't much she could do. But Judith was determined to do whatever it took to get that child the assistance she needed. But with the parents present, how could she possibly do anything? Between bringing dishes to other tables, Judith continued to observe the family. The young daughter didn't touch anything while the son, parents, and other family members were all eating. Not one of them volunteered to give her a piece of their food or to share. Judith's heart fell at the girl's depressing appearance. It was necessary for someone to act. As Judith feigned not to notice the family, she began formulating several schemes in her mind. There had to be a method to talk to the young child that her parents wouldn't discover. When the girl's father refused to let her go, Judith considered attempting to move her away from the table, but it didn't seem feasible. But at last, Judith got an idea. Judith was instantly appreciative of her extensive knowledge of the eatery. After working there for a long time, she had learned by heart where she might stand to observe which tables. She believed she could signal to the girl in one location without the other family members seeing. Judith rushed to verify her hypothesis. When Judith arrived at the spot she had in mind, the parents were looking the other way and a pillar was in her way, preventing her from seeing the boy. From there, Judith figured she could text the girl to see whether she was safe. But the scheme was more than a little dangerous. When Judith initially chose to wave at the girl, she did not reciprocate. She seems a little perplexed by what was happening. Judith truly needed to have a private conversation with the girl before the family left the eatery. Judith sensed something wasn't quite right. Then she picked up a pen and paper and penned a note. "Do you need help?" it asked. Without her father seeing, the girl nodded as she gazed at Judith. "Okay," Judith wrote to let the girl know she would assist her. Judith now had to devise a strategy to approach the girl by herself. Speaking with her in the restroom would be the most convenient method for Judith. There was nowhere else she could talk to the child without someone else getting in the way. Judith had an idea, but she needed some of her co-workers to support her. Judith let her closest co-workers know that there was a problem in the family. In fact, one of them admitted that she had also noticed it. Judith devised a scheme to allow her co-worker to inadvertently splash soda over the girl and father. They needed to leave the table for this to happen. Judith had to first alert her manager in order to avoid losing her job for assisting a female. The proposal was really approved by her employer. They had to assist the girl. Even in cases where the actions have a valid explanation, they believed that learning the entire tale was their obligation. Thus, they initiated the plan. Even though Judith was rather anxious, she believed they were making the correct decision. Her colleague hurried up to the table and took the drink order. To ensure that the strategy would work, they prepared the order right away. Then things got going. The beverages were artfully spilled. The father lost his temper. The father became quite irate at Judith's associate. Judith hurried over to the table to assist her employer. The father stood up and made his way to the bathroom. It was Judith's moment. She had to accept it immediately. She suggested escorting the young person. Judith was staring at her mother. At first, the mother was hesitant, but her daughter pleaded with her to accompany Judith. Although she agreed, her mother felt that this was a little strange. The mother was scanning the area to see whether her husband had returned yet, but he was nowhere to be seen. This seemed unusual to Judith, but it was about to grow much stranger. Judith was seized by the arm by the mother. She drew Judith nearer. Judith was perplexed. The mother then said in a whisper, "Take her quickly." Judith was astounded by what she heard. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.